Benji Narson, friend of the channel, his first FTP test. Let's watch, and I'll give you my thoughts as we go along. In partnership with The Breakaway. The Breakaway is a training and analytics app. So they're partnering with him, which means they're giving him some money. So he's going to be obviously speaking positive about them, but I'll let you know what I think about the app if he talks about it throughout the video.
As you might have seen in my previous video, I've lost 20 kilos across 2022.
Awesome.
But this year, I want to take it one step further. In 2023, I want to become a better cyclist. Now, how do I start this journey? I need to figure out a way to calculate my current level, to measure how terrible I am currently at cycling, because in 1 year, I'd like to do the same and then compare the two tests. You know?
Yeah, you don't need to do an FTP test. It's tempting to do because it's nice to know where you started and then you can track progress along the way. But for a pure beginner, an FTP test, I wouldn't say necessary, but could be nice to do. It makes for good content, good videos. So let's see how he gets on.
That meme where they say, I fear no man, but that thing, it scares me. Well, they were talking about the thing I'm gonna do today. Today, I'll take on my first ever FTP test. This will blow your mind, but an FTP test is a test that measures your FTP. You didn't see that coming, did you? FTP stands for Functional Threshold Power. Effectively, the power you can hold on your pedals for 1 hour straight, measured in watts. I'm planning to do my...
Yes, that is FTP. There are plenty of other measures that people use for anaerobic threshold or maximal lactate steady state and different terms like that. FTP, for what us road cyclists use, is essentially the power that you should be able to do for an hour in a max effort when you're in a good fresh state, in your good form. That's what we use as FTP.
My FTP test on Zwift on my indoor trainer, partially because it's cold outside, it's winter, but next to that, because I need to be able to ride X amount of minutes without traffic interrupting me. Now,
I'd prefer FTP testing on the road, especially if you're someone who's riding outdoors. So Benji's sponsored by Zwift, so he's obviously going to be doing it on Zwift, but I'd say for a beginner, outdoors is preferable just because, firstly, it's easier to keep cool outdoors. Most people also have a power difference between their indoor and outdoor power. So it's beneficial to do your test outdoors, which for most people is going to be where they're doing a lot of their riding, or at least that's where their targets are on the road. So FTP test on the road is better, but it's impossible to do a ramp test on the road because you need erg mode to hold the power. So doing a ramp test, obviously it's going to be indoors. As a way to measure where his fitness is at right now, it's good. I would just take that power number he gets from any of these tests with a grain of salt compared to when he goes outside.
now, I've got one major problem. Currently, I'm staying in the UK and I don't have an indoor trainer here, so that's a bit of an issue if I want to ride indoors.
The other thing as well that he mentioned about finding a good place to do a 20-minute test, sort of because you're outside and there's traffic lights and stuff. I think most people can probably find somewhere to do a test. It doesn't even need to be up a hill. So I recommend a lot of the time, even if you're doing it outdoors, it can be on a flat stretch of road. It doesn't need to be even that inventive. You could pick an out and back stretch of road, quiet street, as long as it's a few, even if you have to turn around a couple of times and do a couple of loops. I'd actually prefer that in terms of field testing to make it applicable to outdoor riding, as opposed to doing a test on the train, a ramp test on the trainer. It's so far removed from the actual riding you're going to be doing. I think people are like, oh, I don't have a nice, long, steady 20-minute climb near me, so I can't do my test outdoors, which isn't really true. I've seen some real ghetto FTP tests done literally out and back loops. So consider that too. If you have to turn around and you're off the pedals for a couple of seconds as you turn around, it's not a big deal.
Fortunately, Zwift was kind enough to help me out, as they've invited me to their UK office in the heart of London. Next to that, they allowed me to use one of the greatest Zwift setups I have ever...
Okay, let's pick through the Zwift setup here. So main things I'm looking at, the biggest number one concern indoors is cooling, because we know it can fluctuate depending on how much you're overheating, but if you overheat during an FTP test or any sort of test, the decrement in power you could see could be easily 5%. That wouldn't be, I know that's not me exaggerating, even 10%, literally a 10% reduction in your FTP test, especially in a longer test, like a 20-minute test, you could be 10% lower if the room's too hot. Now, he's in the UK, Zwift office, we've got air conditioning up here, so it's not going to be an issue. It's not going to be that big of an issue for him, but it could still be a couple of percent. But let's assess. We've got kicker bikes here, good road feel, good inertia, accurate power readings too. It looks like we've got ducted aircon plus another separate aircon unit. Wahoo Kicker headwind fans, 1 per bike. Maybe he could turn one of these around and have 2 facing him. Still, probably only thing I'm looking at here is just low on the wind movement. So probably would prefer to see a pedestal fan, bigger industrial size one, blowing a huge amount of air. That's the only thing. This setup does look really nice.
Seen the Zwift Lab. One thing is certain, if I perform a poor FTP test, it definitely won't be the equipment's fault. So which type of FTP test am I planning to do? Because there's multiple types available on Zwift. A ramp test is considered the most beginner friendly. You start off with a 5-minute free ride, after which I start riding at 100 watts.
Okay. The thing is with a ramp test is this is going up in 20 watt steps. Now, for Benji, that's probably okay because he's an adult male, so he's probably going to be doing a decent amount of power. But if you're a smaller rider, maybe even a female beginner, you might be finishing your test at 200 or 220 watts at VO2 max. That's a ramp test is essentially a VO2 max test, and you're taking a percentage of that to get FTP. So with 20 watt steps, if you're a small female, you might be ending in 200 and 220 watts. And we want the ramp test to go for, back in uni days, about 10 to 15 minutes long is the right duration. But you can see here, if you're a small female or a really new rider doing this test and you finish at 200 watts, you've only done like 5 steps. The test is going to be about 5 minutes long. It's way too short. So if you're a smaller rider, smaller steps. So if you go into a lab and they're testing you, they might do 15 watt steps if you're a newer rider, smaller rider. And same again, if you're, let's say you're getting up to the 450, 500, 550 watt steps, which people will do if they're really experienced, you'll be out here for 25, 30 minutes if you're doing 20 watt ramps. So in that case, you might want to do, if you're really fit, 25 or 30 watt steps just to make sure the test is around 10 to 15 minutes long. If it's really long or really short, something's a bit wrong there. And then the values you're getting calculated off that could be thrown off. I mean, estimating FTP for a ramp test is already very dodgy anyway, but it's going to be even worse if the test is...
But each minute, the watts I have to put out increase by 20 watts, until I can't sustain the necessary power anymore. Zwifting calculates my FTP based on where I end up. A 20-minute FTP test is quite different, but very straightforward. After a proper warm-up session, there's a block of 20 minutes where I need to ride as hard as I can to obtain as high of an average power across those 20 minutes as possible. The reason that this one is less beginner friendly is because you need a pacing plan. If you go too hard at the start, you'll blow up in the second half. If you go too slow at the start, you might not get the best out of yourself there.
I don't know many people that regret going too easy in the first half of a 20-minute test. I mean, you can definitely blow yourself up by going too hard, but even if you get 15 minutes in, you're like, oh, I'm really underdone here. You can still just do a massive surge for the last 5 minutes, which kind of will change how accurately that's estimating your FTP, but you can always empty the tank in the last couple of minutes. So going out too conservatively in a 20-minute test is, yeah, not really a concern that I'd have.
Thing is, this is my first FTP test, so I'll pick the most beginner-friendly one. I'll pick the ramp test.
Nice. So I agree with that. Ramp test for a pure beginner on the trainer for their first test, I like. The only thing is taking 75% of that peak 1 minute value, which is how they say you estimate FTP from a ramp test like this, is really a big, not even a grain of salt. We're talking buckets of salt with that result, because it's just not an accurate way to estimate FTP. So still a very good test to measure your fitness, and then you can repeat that in 3, 6, 12 months time. But yeah, just as soon as you set that FTP that this test gives you, you just need to be really cautious with your sessions and make sure you're not blindly following that FTP, because it's probably going to be wrong, to be honest.
I'll be honest, I have no clue what to expect, but the result doesn't really matter. The most important part is, whatever FTP I end up with today, in 1 year, I want to do better. Anyway, let's...
Exactly. I agree. The result in and of itself doesn't even really matter from a physiological point of view, because it's not a good way to test FTP, so or set FTP. So it's a good fitness test, but, you know, once you get your FTP number here, you're going to have to be analyzing all your training to make sure that it's actually realistic. And you know as well, it says your FTP is 200 watts and you go out in the road and do 200 watts for 10 minutes and you're about to blow up. It's probably got to set the FTP wrong. So it doesn't take, you know, it doesn't even really take an experienced coach to figure out if that FTP is right or not. Most people can figure it out on their own.
Let's get started with my ramp tests.
3, 2,
Let's go.
1, let's go.
Okay, first thing that I would flag here that I mean, Zwift is awesome. It's the best indoor training platform, hands down. Everyone knows that. The only thing I don't like is you can't adjust what metrics are up on the screen here. So you can see having heart rate on the screen. If you're going into a lab to do a ramp test, you would usually be blind to the power that you're doing, and you definitely be blind to the heart rate you're doing. Just because when you see that heart rate go up, you get towards, the ramp start getting hard and you see 180, 190 beats per minute, you can kind of talk yourself out of the test. So I prefer, if I was doing this, I would tape over that heart rate value just so it doesn't psych you out. But the rest this looks all good. Let's go back. So heart rate measurement as well.
Better.
Here it is. So heart rate measured by the forearm straps. I like these. I probably wouldn't use it on the road because I think that would probably annoy me on the road. But for a maximal effort like this, I personally don't like using the chest straps. When you're going to maximal respiration rate, I personally find it annoying to have that slight constriction across the ribs. So if I was doing a ramp test where I'm going to be going absolutely full gas, definitely prefer the forearm strap. They're still very accurate, and you just have you totally unrestricted breathing. Only thing that I can see in terms of that sort of restriction and comfort and heating as well is he's got his jersey zipped up. I mean, he's in this Zwift HQ, so he's probably not going to want to go topless in there sweating it up. But yeah, he's going to have better cooling taking that jersey off. And you can see as well, have a look at his hair moving. It's just a reflection of the airflow he's getting. The hair's, it sounds kind of funny. His hair's not really moving that much, which means there's not that much airflow coming across his face.
There we go.
So just another thing, I know I sound like a nut on the cooling, but it's just because it really can impact the results. So on the cooling, so the reason it can impact results as well is because if you do a test and you slightly overheat and then you retest yourself in a few months later, your FTP improvement could be like half just from acclimating to the heat from your training and not actually an improvement in aerobic fitness. So it's important that when you're testing, you're not having that heating influence impacting you. Okay, if you were training specifically for a hot race, it might be interesting to include that variable in your testing. But for a beginner, that you just want a fair test of exactly how much power you can possibly do. Even if this room is really cold, because it looks like they do have really good aircon, it's actually the airflow that does most of the cooling, that evaporative cooling, because you sweat, the sweat sits on the top of your skin, the air brushes over it, and that evaporation literally sucks heat away from your skin out of your blood vessels. So evaporative cooling is the most important. So you can think the room's cool enough because you get in there and you got to warm up. You're like, oh, I'm freezing here. But think about outside, even on a relatively cool day, let's say if it's 15 degrees Celsius and you're going up a climb where that airflow stops, you can still be dripping sweat. So that's going to be even more exaggerated when you're on the trainer. If you finish the test and look around and your jersey is totally covered in sweat and you've got it dripped all over your bike frame and all over the floor, chances are there's probably a few % of power loss that you've gotten from your overheating.
240 now. This is gonna get tough.
Up. Let's go, Benji. The cadence is grinding. Here we go. 48 RPM. 50 RPM.
360 now. This is where it's gonna start hurting.
Okay, one thing I'm gonna say, when these, so you can see he's 40 seconds to go in his ramp. His cadence is already dropping down. So the problem is when he gets to that next step, that trainer's just going to go, whoop, resistance is going to go up, and that's going to keep driving his cadence down every step. So what you actually need to do, and if he had a lab technician or a coach here in the room, what the coach would be saying in the 3 or 4 seconds before the step takes place, the coach would be saying, okay, Benji, it's going to step up. I want you to just get on top of the gear. And that all that does is you just an extra bit of pressure on the pedals. The trainer detects that. And then when the step goes up, it takes a longer time for it to increase the resistance, which means you can just stay on top of the cadence. What you don't want to do is just be sitting at that flat cadence and let that resistance increase drive up your power. You need to anticipate every step, which may mean for that 3 or 4 seconds before the ramp kicks up, doing an extra 10 or 20 watts, which is when you're going in the box, it's really hard to do, but that's just what, with erg mode, it's just what you need to do in these ramp tests.
Now it's getting really hard. Now it's getting This is it.
Jersey zip right up. Okay, he's got a microphone on. It's probably why the jersey zip right up. But yeah, it looks, you know, get that unzipped, get that airflow.
And the result is 198 watts FTP. But I instantly wondered, did I go hard enough? Did I go deep enough? Did I even do the test correctly? Personally,
that's a very common thing. Most people do. Okay, you finish your whatever test it is, ramp test, 20-minute test, you finish and you're like, oh, that was hard. And then a couple of hours later, you're thinking back, or the next day, and you go, oh, actually, I probably could have gone a bit harder. I think I had a bit more left in the tank. Very common. Usually at the time, you went as hard as you could. You kind of forget the pain you were in, so you think you could have done more. Most people genuinely empty themselves and give it all they have in their test. So don't let your brain play tricks on you in the days after your test. You probably did give it everything you had.
I think I kept my cadence way too low, which caused the trainer to increase its difficulty to turn the pedals, and as a consequence, that reduces my cadence once again.
So just on that, look, everyone has a different preferred cadence. So when I see someone doing a ramp test and they're at 70 RPM, that doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. It's still, that might be their preferred cadence, especially for someone who's newer to cycling, hasn't built up that efficiency and coordination in a pedal stroke. They're going to probably naturally sit a little bit lower with their cadence. So that's fine. What you kind of have to figure out is how much of that was due to erg mode. And I think I would say, looking at that, you know, sitting at 50, 55 RPM through the test is probably not his preferred cadence, I'm going to say. So I would say there is a little bit of this that is due to erg mode, and that's probably is going to impact his results.
In other words, my cadence is something I really need to work on. Yeah. I'll be honest, 198 watts was roughly what I expected when it comes to the result of my FTP test, but then I started thinking, what if I make this video some kind of experiment? Ramp test versus 20-minute FTP test. How hard is a 20-minute FTP test compared to a ramp test when it comes to doing it? So
I actually prefer a 20-minute test. On paper, they're harder because you're sitting in the pain for longer. You know, in a 20-minute test, usually the second half of it, the last 10 minutes is brutal. Whereas in a ramp test, it's usually the only, depending on how long you do your test for, how many ramps you've got, it's usually only the last 4 minutes, 5 minutes that are painful. So, yeah. But I actually prefer the steadier. I couldn't think of anything worse than doing a ramp test, to be honest, but that's just me.
I was very curious to try this out. Before I dive into my 20-minute test, I'd like to talk about the Breakaway app.
Here we go, Breakaway app. Let's see.
An app I'll be using in this series to track my progress. After signing up and connecting my Zwift account, the Breakaway app imported all my power data from previous rides. Now I can see my power records across all kinds of efforts, from a 15-second sprint to a 30-minute longer effort.
30-minute benchmark. Oh, that's that's a bit rude. Look how far they got him down the. He's lower than a beginner. That's a bit mean, isn't it?
Taking a look at today's ramp test, I actually broke 2 of my records, my 3-minute power record and my 5-minute power record. But I'm fairly certain I'll break my 20-minute record as well this episode. Thing is that.
Okay, so it looks like there, at least the first thing he's pointed out is the analytics. It comes in, it shows you your PBs. You know, potentially useful to having running in the background. The only concern I have with that for a pure beginner like Benji's, we're talking like the first 6 months of training, is that that sort of gamifying of fitness where you're going out and it's sort of giving you medals for doing high powers is kind of useful to have in the background to assess your fitness increase. But really, as a beginner, there's so much more important things to learn. So stuff that, I mean, if you're watching this video, you might not even remember having to learn. So like, what position, when I'm riding, what position do I ride in? When do I sit? When do I stand? How do I change gears to keep my cadence smooth and keep the power output smooth? Learning how to pedal smoothly and be coordinated and not sort of jagged and choppy through the pedal stroke. What is it? Even other things as well that I would sort of prefer a real beginner focus on. Like, what does it feel like to ride 2, 3, 4 days in a row? Where am I getting sore? What sort of things can I do to help myself recover when I ride 3 days in a row? All those sorts of things which are not analytical at all are actually really important, and that's probably what I would prefer a pure beginner like Benji spends his time thinking about, as opposed to spending, you know, a lot of time in an app trying to figure out how much fitness he's gained. It's just not really, I feel like it's sort of a dangerous road to go down for a pure beginner. What I'd probably do if I was Benji is get the app, let that analytics run in the background, and then 6, 8, 12 months down the track, when you are actually a competent, good road cyclist, then you can, and you've got those basics down of just how to ride a bike and do an effort, and then you can go down and start to see, all right, let's do some more intense training and see what we can get to.
The danger of a 20-minute FTP test is that if I go too hard at the start, I might not make it to that 20-minute mark. But if I go too slow at the start, I might not get the most out of myself. So I need a proper pacing plan. And we're lucky because I just did a RAM test, which says that I can roughly ride 198 watts for an hour. So I haven't...
Yeah, we will see. We will... I'm not... Look, tests are really good to test you, to see improvement, but that 198 watts from a ramp test, that's just such a weird roundabout way to estimate. But yeah, we will see.
Result of 198 FTP, I have to ride 209 watts across 20 minutes. Yeah. But I've decided I want to risk it, because why the hell not?
Oh dear.
I will make the risk and go harder at the start at 230 watts and see how long I can hold that. If I can hold that, amazing. If I can't, I will lower and I will lower until there's a level that I feel like I can hold.
That's a brutal way to do a 20-minute test, just to send it full gas for the first 5 minutes, 20 watts above what you probably can do, and then see if you can hold it. Yeah. Woo. Ouch.
That is the plan. I won't go too extreme at the start either. 250 would be insane and so forth, because it's unrealistic that I can hold that for 20 minutes.
I'd say go off and do 205 for the first 5 minutes. Real easy. 200 watts even. You can always just ramp it up 10 or 15 watts in the last 5 minutes if you need to, if you've got some left in the tank.
Anyway, let's get the suffering started and have the 20-minute FTP test begin.
Prepare for your max 20 minutes effort. Am I looking forward to it? No. Let's go for 230 average.
And again, just to reiterate the thing about the heart rate. So how far is he? So he's 5 minutes in. Oh, my heart rate's 165. Oh, I thought it would be higher than that. Oh, geez, my heart rate's high. Oh, I thought it would be lower than that. Like, that's not mind games you want to be playing when you're 5 minutes into a 20-minute max effort. So I just a little bit of tape physically on the screen just to cover that. I think you'd be much better off.
Now might be the time to add 10 watts. Get out of here. I can't do that.
So the text on the screen there was halfway done. If it's feeling easy, you might be able to add 10 watts. And that's so...
It's feeling easy, they say. No, it's not. I'm dying.
So that positive Zwift, that's really smart. So they've done research on motivational talking to a rider when they're doing a fitness test. And it is positive reinforcement. Just telling someone they're doing well, even if they're doing rubbish, gets them a better performance outcome. So yeah, positive self-talk, especially internally, or if that's coming from Zwift, thumbs up. That's exactly what you need.
Oh, what am I doing with my life? Why am I doing this? My ribs hurt. My head hurts.
Okay. This is what I mean. Like, it's nice to have the data. So Benji's really valuing doing this test. But as a coach, I'd feel really bad asking someone like Benji off the couch who's new to training to be putting himself through this sort of thing. I'm glad he's doing it for a video because we can all learn from it. But yeah, I would be very cautious in prescribing something like this, because it's just not fun, is it? I mean, look, who wants to do this?
That FTP test was ruthless, and the result is 190 watts.
Ah, 190 watt FTP. Remember, the ramp test told him his FTP was 198. That's a big difference. An 8 watt difference when you're doing 190 watts that's a lot. So yeah, I would trust the 20-minute test because it's a steadier effort. So it's testing that's going to translate better. Remember, FTP is what you can do for an hour theoretically. So a 20-minute test is going to be more accurate. And you can kind of tell, like, if he had just done the ramp test and then had entered that 198 as his FTP in his training swaffer and he's trying to tick workouts off, you know, It's going to be really difficult to manage that.
One thing is certain, the 20-minute FTP test was a lot harder than the ramp test for me. I suffered a lot longer, which is logical. But the result is also different. 198 when it comes to the ramp test, 190 watts when it comes to my 20-minute FTP test.
So, all right. Is he going to take 198 or 190? Because there's a lot of people out there they'd go, 190. Actually, probably, I was a bit off that day. It's probably 200 watts. So, hopefully, I hope he uses the lower number because it's going to be more accurate.
Supposedly, the 20-minute FTP test is a better estimation when it comes to a 1-hour effort. And that being said, while doing it, it also feels that way because you're actually having a longer effort. Yeah. Anyway, from this point onwards, I will consider 190 watts my current FTP level.
But you can kind of see why I say it doesn't, in a sense, it doesn't really matter. So for a training point of view, it matters. But in terms of tracking improvement, if he repeats that ramp test and the ramp test says his FTP's 240, that's still a 40-watt improvement at a calculated FTP. So for tracking improvement, it's fine. It's just that getting that FTP.
So in 1 year, I want to beat that by quite a bit. Yes. Maybe I'll try and hunt for 225 to 250.
Okay, good comparison. So if you've watched some of my other videos, we've got EJ from NorCal Cycling 2 did a similar thing. Interesting that coming sort of off the couch, both of their FTPs, they say, were around 190 watts. So interesting that we're at a similar level. Now, EJ had more of a athletic background, so it's going to be interesting to track, how does Benji improve? It's probably more of a realistic improvement rate over the next 6 months compared to someone like EJ who's played sport in his background. Benji's a gamer, so it's going to be a lot harder for him to see a higher improvement rate.
I think 250 is a nice goal. Opening up the Breakaway app,
Okay, here we go. Breakaway app, Zwift FTP test. I just want to read through this. So intensity focused. This is what it's all about, Benji. Stressing your system. These rides, when matched with good recovery, are what really create improvement. And that's one of the things I'm just cautious with an app like this for a pure beginner. It is true, and there needs to be some intensity in training. If you're a pure beginner or a super experienced rider, you need to do some intensity, but having a pure beginner focused on intensity I don't think is good. They actually need to be doing predominantly the opposite, focusing on low intensity, because it's over a 6-month period. How frequently can Benji ride? How much volume can he get done without totally burying himself? And can he do that with continuing his weight loss? That's going to set up how well he's riding in 12 months. So the app sort of giving him a thumbs up for pushing really hard is, questionable for a pure beginner. There probably are other parts of this app. I've only seen like 2 little snippets of it. I've never used it, but so in terms of achievements, what I'd like to be seeing for a beginner would be like, hey, you rode 6 times this week and you averaged 45 minutes a day, and encouraging that sort of thing in terms of gamifying your training, I think would be really good for someone like Benji.
But hey, these small things keep me motivated along the way. So if you want to try out the Breakaway app, it's available on...
Yeah, that's the thing. It's a hard thing because I'm sitting here saying, well, giving someone thumbs up for doing intensity is potentially giving them a bum steer because they actually need to focus on low intensity. But Benji's saying, well, actually having these things pop up, these achievements, is giving me more motivation. If that then leads to more riding, then you could argue it's an overall good benefit. So we can analyze these things from a scientific sort of point of view, if they're good or bad, but then there's also the reality of how they holistically sort of motivate an athlete, which is a fair point to make.
To that, I can now train according to my power zones. There are 7 power zones in which I can train to achieve different results this year.
What zone is Benji going to predominantly need to ride in as a beginner to see aerobic improvement and set himself up well for improvement down the track?
For example, you might have heard of Zone 2 training. That is considered the endurance zone.
There you go. I think I'll end it there. Thanks for watching this video, guys. Thanks to Benji for putting this content out. Excited and keen to follow how he goes over the next few months. Catch you in the next video.